Tornado mysteries can often be one of the most intriguing and terrifying tales one can listen to. The uncertainty of Mother Nature's behavior outside of man's control ought to invoke great fear into the minds of those unfortunate enough to deal with her tornadic wrath. Although many advancements in meteorology have progressed predicting, forecasting, and tracking tornadoes to unimaginable standards compared to just 50 years ago, mostly all tornadoes before then were just the horrifying recounts of the survivors, possibly a few photographs of these monsters, and the devastating aftermath they caused. In the 1980s, which was the decade before advancements such as velocity radar would be implemented, could arguably be considered as one of the last decades of truly mysterious tornadoes. And one of these mysteries, which happened on July 3rd, 1983, would find itself a bit too close to home, finally unveiled into consciousness once again. Welcome to the mystery of the Dodgeville tornado. Living near Dodgeville, Wisconsin for most of my life, I've never heard of this tornado, nor has it ever been brought up to most people's attention. In fact, while researching information on the 1984 Barneveld, Wisconsin F5, I tried looking at various other tornado paths that went near the town for curiosity's sake. While scanning the many blue EF0 lines and green EF1 paths that performed their dark yet feeble dances north of Barneveld on June 6, 2006, I noticed something quite strange.
Good Lord, what is happening in there?
Tornadic activity?
Just 10 miles west of Barneveld down US Highway 18151, the small city of Dodgeville contained something so staggering that I had to stop for a few seconds and ponder what I was looking at on my computer screen. A red triangle. Now, what kind of silly significance could this possibly even have? Dodgeville, about 1 year prior to the atrocious 1984 Barneveld F5 tornado, had an F4 tornado. Can I get everyone's attention for a couple minutes here? Can I get everyone's... Oh, okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you for your cooperation. Yeah, so I was just wondering, how has nobody brought any attention to this for the past 41 years? Tornadoes rated F4 are one of the most significant weather events that can ever occur on planet Earth. For instance, winds between 200 to 260 miles per hour are possible. These speeds are not too far off from the Barneveld F5's 250 to 300 mile per hour winds. The damage F4 tornadoes can do to buildings is devastating, leveling well-constructed buildings to nothingness and sweeping poorly built buildings away from their foundations. Some of these F4 and EF4 tornadoes can be just as devastating and costly as their bigger F5 and EF5 brothers. The Windsor Locks, Connecticut F4 tornado of October 3rd, 1979 did an incredible $1.8 billion worth of devastation adjusted for inflation today. EF4 tornadoes, such as the Mayfield, Kentucky EF4 on December 10th, 2021, took 57 lives and injured over 500 people. And, not to mention, the 2011 Tuscaloosa, Alabama EF4 tornado that, adjusted for inflation in 2024, did $3.4 billion of destruction, which is the second costliest tornado in recorded history. The significance of a tornado of this magnitude is, to say the least, jaw-dropping. How did an F4 tornado that hit Dodgeville, Wisconsin on July 3rd, 1983 get swept under the rug for so many years, and why isn't this tornado brought up as a historically significant weather event? First and foremost, I want to clear up a misconception I made in my last video, where I covered the 1984 Barneveld F5 tornado. I made a crucial mistake calling the Barneveld tornado an EF5 rather than an F5, and even fumbled it up in the thumbnail. Why does this matter? Well, to be as concise as possible, the EF scale, or Enhanced Fujita scale, would not be in use for another 23 years after the Barneveld tornado had touched down. Thus, the Barneveld tornado would maintain its F5 rating, and you don't take older tornadoes and give them a new EF rating. There's many differences between F and EF rated tornadoes, and it's a subject I may consider making into a video in the future. Now that I've acknowledged my blunder, what exactly happened on July 3rd, 1983 in Dodgeville, Wisconsin? Before we look at the events and tackle the mystery of July 3rd, 1983, we should take a quick look at the 1983 tornado season. While tornado activity was higher on average at the time, with 931 confirmed tornadoes compared to 739, 1983 was quieter than 1982, as there were about 113 fewer tornadoes and only 4 violent tornadoes would occur, with no F5s and all of them being rated F4. 2 of these tornadoes would occur in the same state of Louisiana. The first F4 of the year would happen on April Fool's Day in 1983 in Collinston, Louisiana, where this tornado would end the lives of 2 people while injuring 20. The final F4 tornado would occur on December 6th in LaPlace, Louisiana, injuring 25 people, but thankfully taking no lives with it. The other 2 F4 tornadoes of 1983 would happen within the same outbreak on the same day, that being July 3rd. A total of 26 tornadoes would touch down in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Of the 2 F4s, the first would touch down in Andover, Minnesota, in the northern suburbs of Minneapolis. This tornado would injure 4 people and destroyed 50 homes as well as damage hundreds more. Notably within these storms in Minnesota on July 3rd were the occurrence of downburst winds, which are winds from high elevation cumulonimbus clouds that slam downwards towards the ground and disperse outwardly at very high speeds, rivaling even EF0 and EF1 rated tornadoes. The highest concentration of damage would be reported in Champlin, just southwest of Andover, where $3.5 million worth of damage to a shopping center would occur by these downburst winds. What's more striking with these winds is that they continued eastbound, disrupting a carnival occurring in Forest Lake, injuring 3 workers, rendering 2 of them with broken bones, and tragically taking the life of a child and injuring 3 more people at a campsite north of Taylor's Falls. Strangely, there were some conflicting opinions amongst meteorologists from the National Weather Service in Minneapolis about the Andover F4 tornado after the storms had passed through. There is no mention of this tornado in the National Weather Service synopsis of the destruction that occurred in the northern suburbs of Minneapolis that Sunday afternoon. One meteorologist, William Togstead, believed that straight-line winds from the supercellular downbursts causing 120 to 140 mile-per-hour wind gusts were the culprits for the combined $20 million worth of damage to numerous homes and buildings. Another, Bruce Watson, believed a tornado did touch down, but believed that this tornado would have happened in Champlin, where the shopping center was destroyed, about 8 miles southwest of Andover, and where the highest amount of concentrated damage happened. Nevertheless, the National Weather Service seemed to have decided that a tornado had indeed ripped through Andover, Minnesota, and would rate it as an F4 tornado that traveled just 1 mile and had a very narrow width of 67 yards. Some speculate that there could have been potentially more tornadoes that occurred that afternoon. Despite the possibility of this, the tale of the Andover, Minnesota F4 tornado contains some level of mystery amongst the devastating winds that rolled through on July 3rd, 1983. And speaking of mysteries, how about the other F4 tornado that happened on July 3rd, 1983? If you search for the July 3rd, 1983 Dodgeville tornado on Google, you will uncover, well, hardly anything at all. We know this tornado was the smallest of the 1983 F4s, just 150 feet or 46 meters across. It traveled the least amount of distance, not even cracking a mile in length. It occurred at 7:15 p.m. and took no lives as well as injuring nobody. You could say that this was the best case F4 tornado to have ever happened in 1983. In fact, this Dodgeville F4 tornado is a contender for one of the least significant F4 tornadoes to have ever touched the ground since tornadoes began being documented in 1950. I'm not making this up. I looked through all of the F4 and EF4 tornado paths on the Midwest Regional Climate Center website, where these storms barely had any distance traveled. Interestingly, there were quite a few of these monsters that could never keep their foot on the gas and rose back up to the skies as soon as they stepped foot onto the ground. I wanted to look for an F4 that had no fatalities, few to no injuries, and covered the least distance, around 3 miles or less in total length. These tornadoes on the map were dead giveaways by being just a red triangle with a microscopic to non-existent red path line, and there are currently about 34 of these to have occurred. Some notable contenders included the 1992 F4 southwest of Beloit, Kansas, that traveled 3 miles and caused no harm to any human life, as well as the 1956 Pleasanton, Nebraska F4 that lasted for 2 miles and also spared all life in its path. Just as I had thought that the 1983 Dodgeville, Wisconsin F4 would have been crowned as the least detrimental F4 in U.S. history, I noticed one even less significant. East of Watauga, Oklahoma, an F4 tornado would completely level a farm on June 10, 1967. This tornado would leave no fatalities or any injuries and traveled a whopping 1/10 of a mile and was just 30 feet across, outwimping the very measly half-mile distance and 150-foot width of the Dodgeville F4. Alright, I should be clear. It's disgraceful to call any F4 tornado pathetic, because an F4 has to actually destroy something in order to get that F4 rating, and the destruction of property due to severe weather is a tragedy. We can't forget that these F4s are still some of the deadliest forces on planet Earth. Had any of these tornadoes occurred in much more heavily populated areas, such as the horrific Warner Robins, Georgia F4 of April 30th, 1953 that traveled a single mile and took 18 lives and injured 300 others, the story could have been completely different and would be remembered for decades to come. Speaking of which, that's probably the likelihood of why this 1983 Dodgeville F4 has been forgotten to the sands of time. It took no life and caused no harm. But what I'm left wondering is, what did this tornado destroy in Dodgeville that caused insane F4 damage? Remember, this storm was rated with the old Fujita scale, and wind speeds in F4 rated tornadoes ranged between a staggering 207 to 260 miles per hour, which can easily rip apart sturdy structures to bits. Assuming that the structural integrity of these buildings were well constructed, as well as the wind speed estimates being correct, how did this tornado go under the radar of severe weather history? Let's take a look at the touchdown point. It occurred in Dodgeville where East Pine Street meets North Short Street, and we know that the tornado would have traveled about a half mile and done some extreme damage before lifting from the ground and disappearing. Tornadoes tend to follow a northeasterly trajectory, and without knowing exactly where the tornado went due to a lack of any information, I've tried making a few different paths that the tornado likely could have taken. Since this tornado happened in 1983, trying to find old aerial photos and satellite images has proven to be very difficult, considering that there's not very much to look through, and, well, some of these images are either just out of reach to see what's going on, some are a bit too old, or are a bit, well, let's just say terrible. We can see from some older satellite photos, such as from 1995, that a lot of houses and businesses haven't been constructed yet. Some of these places, such as the United States Post Office, Culver's, Walmart, and Walgreens, would not be in the potential paths of this tornado, as they were not built yet or located in a different part of Dodgeville at the time. Now, as we try our best to look at a horrifically low-resolution satellite image from 1985, it doesn't appear that there's much to decipher. However, compared to the 1995 satellite imagery, we can somewhat see a lot more green, suggesting more tree coverage where buildings now currently exist, which means that there were less buildings present just a couple years after the tornado came through. Now, I've been noticing something strange about this location where the tornado touched down. One way to look at a tornado path from satellite imagery is to see the ground scarring it causes, which are indicators of the tornado's path, such as a line of knockdown trees. You can switch between old satellite imagery and newer imagery to see the impact the tornado left behind. For example, if we head over to our neighbors in Barneveld, we can observe some of this tornado scarring left behind by the F5 thanks to satellite imagery from 1984. If you take a look at West Blue Mound, we can see a brown line cutting through its northwest corner. Fast forward a few years into the 2000s, and we can see the brown line start to disappear. These were trees that the tornado had carved a path through as it was exiting town to the northeast. And over the next few years, new trees grew in place of these trees that were down. Considering there were trees in Dodgeville in the general vicinity of where the tornado touched down, we should be able to see a pretty similar effect. We'll have to zoom out just a little bit to get some older imagery from 1984, and then we can compare it to 1985. And as we can see, there's more green foliage present in 1984 than in 1985. Wait, there's more green visible just 1 year after an F4 tornado ripped through a half-mile long by 500-foot wide section of Dodgeville in 1984 than 2 years later in 1985? It seems like the opposite should be true. Even though we can't view close imagery of the tornado's touchdown location in 1983, we can see a pretty thick blotch of green right where the tornado could have potentially touched down. This could suggest that there's trees still standing, which would likely be no match for withstanding an F4's 200 to 260 mile/hour wind gusts. Of course, we don't have crystal clear imagery, so there's obviously going to be some uncertainty of what we're actually looking at. And it's also very possible that some trees may have been spared from the tornado and were cleared away 2 years later. While we can't tell what structures or foliage were in place in 1985 due to the horrible picture quality, we can see that in 1995, there was no house just a few feet south of the tornado's drop point on the map, which could mean that if a house was damaged by this tornado, it may have been a vacant lot for many years until the property was redeveloped for housing again. Something else that looks a bit strange is that there's a diagonal line that runs from the northwest to the southeast, which looks as though it could have been some sort of scarring over time, since we can see that there were no trees in 1985, what appears to be not much there still in 1995, and then in 2005 we can start to see more trees sprouting up. Maybe this tornado landed a little bit north of the location it was thought to have touched down, and instead traveled in a southeasterly direction. This could also explain why there's still foliage present in the original touchdown location. But it's actually a creek bed, leaving me empty-handed and scratching my head once again. No newspaper articles, headlines, photographs, TV coverage, or anything that was ever mentioned about what this F4 tornado destroyed, other than where it happened to land in Dodgeville. One of the most dangerous things a person can experience is rendered to nothing but just a couple red pixels in a triangle formation on a computer screen, devoid of meaning or significance to why it even exists, just to be shelved away as another addition to a forgotten statistic in an even more forgettable tornado season. Except, there is something about the Dodgeville F4 we might know about. If this information uncovered that I'm going to reveal to you about the Dodgeville F4 tornado is the only published and documented instance of what happened on July 3rd, 1983, and nowhere else in Dodgeville was affected by tornado damage of any kind as well that day, then unless otherwise, I will conclude with certainty The Dodgeville F4 tornado never landed in the city limits of Dodgeville, Wisconsin, and the Midwest Regional Climate Center wrongly placed the tornado's touchdown point on the intersecting corner of East Pine Street and North Short Street. As said before, if there's no documented storm damage or any news articles about the Dodgeville F4 in the city limits and little to no evidence of a tornado going through parts of Dodgeville from looking at satellite imagery, it makes no sense that the tornado touched down in the current location. At this point, it seems as though this tornado was just a mere hoax, or someone at the MRCC was bored and slapped a little red triangle there as an incredibly out-of-season April Fool's joke. Now, can we finally shed some light on the mystery of this tornado? I think we might be able to do so. Even though it's a wonderful tool, researching information on Google is becoming more and more limited over time. Fortunately, an idea popped up. Why not get a hold of some sort of historical society near Dodgeville to see if they may have something, anything related to this mystery that's been driving me up a wall? So I gave the Iowa County Historical Society a call. About 2 hours later, my phone rings again. Behold, the story of the July 3rd, 1983 Dodgeville, Wisconsin F4 tornado. At 8:15 p.m., a funnel cloud descends from the skies just north of Dodgeville. Two onlookers, one at the nearby Don Q Inn Hotel and another about 50 yards away from the Dodgeville Monument Company, watch in bewilderment as a tornado proceeds to rip apart a cement block storage garage, tossing large cement blocks up to 200 yards away across State Highway 23. The winds were so powerful that they crushed several pieces of the destroyed concrete building deep into the ground, and even pulled a 3,000-pound display headstone up from the earth like an infected tooth and pulverized it. And just as quickly as it came, in less than half a mile, the Dodgeville F4 tornado was gone. Thankfully, nobody was injured or lost their lives from this storm. Had the trajectory of the tornado went a quarter-mile north of the Dodgeville Monument Company, it could have taken out the Don Q Inn Hotel, a popular tourist spot on State Highway 23 during the summer months. Since this occurred on July 3rd, the day before the 4th of July, it is very likely that this hotel would have had many people vacationing there and would have been catastrophic due to the loss of life and property damage from the immensely strong winds. This storm would cause about $60,000 of damage to Bill Cerruti Jr.'s garage, yet fortunately sparing a company truck and lawnmower from complete loss, despite minor damage to both. It's also fortunate that Cerruti Jr.'s mother, Jenny, who was only 50 yards away from the storm, survived with no injuries despite being relatively close to the high intense winds from the tornado. Incredibly, Cerruti Jr., who was interviewed by what I believe was the Dodgeville Chronicle for this newspaper clip, said that the Dodgeville Monument Company, despite the damages caused by the tornado, would be open for business on Tuesday, July 5th, just 2 days after losing his 1,800 square foot storage garage and some of the company's inventory. Work had to get done, and Bill Cerruti Jr. wasn't going to let a tornado stand in his way. Between Dodgeville and Spring Green is the loneliest stretch of the 211-mile-long Wisconsin State Highway 23. Aside from Wyoming Township, there's no villages or cities for 18 miles, just rolling, undulating hills eventually giving way to deeply carved valleys with some of the most beautiful land on planet Earth. Yet in between them lies the House on the Rock, an attraction that makes a reputation out of indulging in the bizarre. Like how the history of this attraction's creation is shrouded in the mysteries of disputes between its founder Alex Jordan Jr. and the dismay of one very famous architect and Spring Green native Frank Lloyd Wright, the weather events that occurred on July 3rd, 1983 also couldn't escape the mysterious and conflicting accounts, such as from the 2 meteorologists up in Minnesota, and certainly can the same be said for Dodgeville's F4 tornado. Does this tornado seem insignificant in comparison to others, such as its bigger Barneveld F5 brother? Perhaps, but this F4, despite doing damage to only one garage, was able to dismantle that concrete block building into almost complete nothingness. Had it landed a quarter mile to the north or a mile to its south, this tornado would be in the consciousness of southern Wisconsinites for decades. Maybe this Dodgeville F4 doesn't matter to many people, but it mattered to Bill Cerruti Jr., as well as his small business, the Dodgeville Monument Company. And as someone astonished by the existence of a brazenly powerful tornado so close to home just 1 year before Barneveld's F5, it certainly matters to me too. If any of my claims about the MRCC's placement of the tornado in the city limits of Dodgeville are refutable, I would be happy to do a follow-up on the story of the Dodgeville F4, especially if there happened to be damage from downburst winds or even a spin-up funnel that occurred by East Pine Street and North Short Street. Otherwise, we can finally put this case to rest. Special thanks to John from the Iowa County Historical Society for providing me the newspaper article and photographs of the tornado damage. Thanks to him getting me this information days before I had anticipated, this story was able to gain so much traction and reveal some incredible mysteries that were finally unlocked of what became one of the most unexpectedly weird F4 tornadoes in history. Thank you for watching. Hey everyone, before I go, I want to thank everybody who watched my Barneveld F5 tornado video. I am astonished that this video got as much of the reach as it did. 31,000 views, 425 likes, and 85 comments of people who had to experience this terrible, terrible storm. I am astonished and absolutely blessed that people watched this video. It was really special to see some people on here share their stories, especially some of the survivors of the tornado, and you know, it's incredible. And considering that the video and audio quality of this Barneveld video I made is just awful, I mean, it's bad, but people still watched it, and you know, it made me realize it's not about, you know, all the fancy stuff. It's about the story you tell. And, you know, it was really special to just see everybody engage with it and share their stories. So I'm dedicating my YouTube channel now to making tornado videos as well as geography videos. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon with the next video I make.